Welcome back to Quick Canvas Tutorials.
Hello everyone. Today we're going to be continuing the topic of color combination, but this time we're going to be a bit more hands-on and use those primary colors and a little bit of white to get a ton of color combinations that you can use for your next art project, and you'll be surprised how easy it is to get them right.
This is a chromatic circle we used last episode to understand the primary and secondary colors. However, we need to use a slightly more detailed one this episode so you can see all of the possible color combinations you can do by using the primary colors. I left a big space for the primary colors just so you can see them on your screen a bit better, and in between there is enough space or room for the color combinations you'll get by combining the primary colors with a little bit of white. I'll be talking about using yellow or burnt umber in a different video, but for now this is what we're using. Just as a side note, this is the compass I used to make those circles. If you want it to be precise, I recommend using something like this if you can. The colors I used were cobalt blue, cadmium yellow pale hue, and permanent alizarin crimson. You can use different ones if you want, like magenta or ultramarine blue, but these are the ones I had at home. I began with yellow and I placed it on top of the chromatic circle because I feel like visually it's lighter this way, but you can also place the red or the blue here, it doesn't matter. And I also left a space in the middle of the circle for triangles that will help us identify the primary colors. Then I placed the red here. Again, you can place the yellow or the blue here, it doesn't matter. And you can also go for a different type of red. Some people would go for magenta, and that's totally fine. Use whatever you like best. And on the other side, I placed the blue. Normally, I use a French ultramarine blue because it's a bit more intense, but I mentioned previously that I had run out of that specific color, so I just went for the cobalt blue. Once you have your primary colors on the circle, you can start mixing them. And you're going to be using the same level to combine those primary colors without the white. And you're going to use the space in between the blue and the yellow to see the progression of greens. And you're going to be doing the same with the yellow and the red and the blue. Now, for the next steps, you're going to be using a little bit of white, but before we go into that, I want to talk about the importance of the pigments. This is a very important topic and you should pay attention to that. Now, you can see the colors that I was using on the palette here, and the yellow touched the blue by accident. I actually didn't mix the color at that time, and you can see how just a tiny amount of blue can already create a green. You can see it there on the signal by the brush. So, like I mentioned before, equal amounts of those paints or those colors are not going to guarantee that you get a midpoint green. So just be careful and mindful about that. You can tell that I'm using a lot of yellow here, and just a dab of blue is enough to create a light green. This is because the pigment is very dominant, so I would really recommend before you put the paint on your chromatic circle that you experiment with the amounts that you need. This way, you'll develop a sense of how much color is actually needed for your color combinations. And with it, you'll have a lot more control over what you're doing. The point of this exercise is for you to get to know your colors and the amounts that you need in order to get a green or a purple or any other color combination that you want. If you mess it up, it doesn't matter. You can try again and you can try as many times as you want until you get to know the colors that you're using. I would also recommend for you to try different blues and different yellows and different reds, and maybe even a different technique. Maybe try combining colors with acrylic paints or with watercolors. I mean, who knows? All of these things will allow you to broaden the way you see color and the way you can combine it. as you can see, we got all of these greens just by combining different amounts of the yellow and the blue. And that already gives you a ton of possibilities. We're going to try to do the same with the yellow and the red, but I want you to understand something again. Just like with the blue, red is a strong pigment. It's a dominant color. So just be mindful again of the amounts that you're using, because right now I took a ton of yellow and I grabbed a tiny bit of red, and that was enough to change the color actually quite a bit. So I'll stop repeating myself and I'll let you see the selection of oranges that I was able to get by just mixing the yellow and the red that you see on the screen. Quick side note, the purples I got by mixing this intense red and the cobalt blue were very dark, and they usually are even more when I use French ultramarine. But you can try a magenta and see what type of purples you get with those. I'm pretty sure that they will be less intense and they'll bring a little bit more light to your color combinations. Now we can start using white. For this example, I use titanium white because it's the one that I've used all my life, but you can also try using other types of white with your primary colors. So once we use a little bit of white with those colors, we'll start to get lighter tones, and we will start placing them in the inner levels of the chromatic circle. So the closer we are to the center, the lighter the color will be. Now, as you can see, I started with the blue, but you can start with any other primary color that you want. And I would suggest that you stick first of all to the primary ones, because it's just easier like that. And something that you have to have in mind is that white is also a very dominant color, or a very dominant pigment. So you really don't need much to make your colors a bit clearer or lighter. If you're gonna use white, I would really recommend that you are conservative about it. Because once you start using a big amount of white, all of the other colors, even if you didn't intend them to be lighter, will start mixing if they're not dry. The under layers, if they're not dry, they'll start mixing, and then it just loses intensity. So use white carefully. Now, before we finish, I just wanted to say that for the rest of the colors, it's basically the same principle. You just have to have enough of that initial primary color combination that we did for the greens or the orange or the purples. So you can then add the white and get those lighter tones for the inner circles. You can use the same principle to do the other colors. You just need to make sure that you have enough of that initial primary color combination for your greens, your orange, or your purple, so that you can then apply the white to fill in the inner circles. So I really believe that this is a good point to start learning color theory. There's obviously many other topics to talk about, like the value of the colors and the use of burnt umber or whatever. But for now, when you're done with your chromatic circle, it should look more or less something like this. Now, I can spoil you something and tell you that the values of my blues are off, but it doesn't matter. Thank you for watching. If you like this content, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.